Over the last couple of months, I've been using the OnePlus 6T as my main phone. Today I decided to talk about specifications of the phone and review them to let people know if it is worth buying. This is the OnePlus 6T specs video. Hello everybody, my name is Matt and this is Real World Review. What I'm going to do is go over the specs of the phone, and at the end I will score the phone based on my personal experiences as a user and cell phone repairman. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section or on Twitter at MattofRWR. Let's get started. To start, our first category is the outside hardware. Let's start with the display. The display is a 6.41-inch notched optic AMOLED screen with a resolution of 1080 by 2340, totaling 402 pixels per inch. The screen is very bright at a max of roughly 450 nits. The front has a Corning Gorilla Glass 6 display, making the front scratch resistant. The screen to body ratio is about 86% and looks amazing. The screen ratio is 19.5 by 9, just like the iPhone XS. Let's talk about the rest of the front. We start at the top where the earpiece and the sensors are. There's a very thin speaker grill that covers the earpiece. Under that is a fixed focus 16 megapixel front camera. To the left of that are the proximity and ambient light sensors, making all the sensors squished into this teardrop notch. The weird thing is I can't find any information on what these holes are. Really weird. On the bottom portion there is nothing but a wonderful screen and a very slim black bar. Moving on to the frame. On the bottom is a USB-C 2.0 port, 5 holes for the microphone, and 5 holes for the only loudspeaker on the phone. On the right side there is an alert slider and a power button. On the left side there are 2 volume buttons and a dual SIM tray. And on the top there is another microphone. On the back of the device there are 2 sensors, one being a main 16 megapixel sensor and the other being a secondary 20 megapixel sensor. Below that is a dual LED flash unit. Around all of that is a glass back with nothing more than a simple OnePlus logo and the phrase "designed by OnePlus." As for the size, the device is 157.5 millimeters tall, 74.8 millimeters wide, and 8.2 millimeters thick, or 6.2 inches tall, 2.94 inches wide, and 0.32 inches thick. As for the weight, the 6T is 185 grams, or 6.5 ounces. The phone is somewhat water resistant, and it does not have a user removable battery or back. More on that later. And now we move on to the cameras. There are 2 cameras, one being a standard 16 megapixel sensor, while the other is a 20 megapixel sensor which is used for image data. There is also a dual LED flash unit. The aperture is f1.7 for both sensors, and the standard sensor is optically stabilized. The phone supports different camera features like portrait mode, panorama, nightscape, and time-lapse. The rear camera can record video in a couple of ways. You can record 4K at 60 or 30 frames per second, 1080p at 60 or 30 frames per second, 720p at 30 frames per second, and slow motion video can be captured at 1080p at 240 frames per second, or 720p at 480 frames per second. The front camera is a 16 megapixel sensor with an aperture of f2.0. It allows for a max of 1080p recording at 30 frames per second. The next category is the inside hardware. As usual, we start with a processor. The processor in this phone is a 64-bit Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chip. It is a 10nm octa-core processor with 4 cores running at 2.8 GHz and 4 cores running at 1.8 GHz. Geekbench gives the phone a score of around 2,343 for the single core and 8,982 for the multi-core test. The GPU is an Adreno 630 that runs at 710 MHz. When testing the GPU, Geekbench gives a score of about 13,457. The phone has 8GB of LPDDR4X RAM, which works wonders. The model I'm reviewing is the A6013, and it is factory unlocked. The phone supports 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G, assuming that the market you're in still supports those, along with LTE bands 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12, 13, 17, 18, 19, 20, 25, 26, 28, 29, 30, 32, 34, 38, 39, 40, 41, 46, 66, and 71. As for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi chip is 802.11a, B, G, N, AC dual band, and the Bluetooth is version 5.0. This phone also supports NFC, Baidu, and GLONASS. The battery is a 3700 mAh lithium-ion cell that is supposed to last all day. OnePlus does not have any benchmarks for this battery, but it should last a full day with medium to heavy usage. The phone supports 20-watt fast charging and will give you a day's power in half an hour, according to OnePlus. A full charge will take roughly 90 minutes. The phone comes out of the box with Android 9.0 Pie. So far, it seems that OnePlus will keep upgrading the operating system for a couple of years. The phone supports a few audio formats like MP3, WAV, M4A, IMY, and FLAC. As for video playback, the phone supports a few formats like MP4, MKW, MOV, and AVI. Now that we have gone over the specs, it's time for us to give this phone a score. Note that the phone comes in a few variations, those being 6GB of RAM and 128GB of storage, or 8GB of RAM with either 128 or 256GB of storage. The one that I have is 8GB RAM, 256GB storage. The phone can be purchased new from $550 to $700 US. It should also be noted that this phone is about 6 months old and most people want to buy this phone new, and the scoring does account for this. Let's start with the frame. The phone is made out of glass and metal. The front is made out of glass as well as the back of the phone. The screen is a flat, notched, optic AMOLED display. There's a single earpiece at the top and that's about it. Nothing much going on with the front other than the screen and the teardrop notch. The frame is a fairly durable matte aluminum that wraps around the phone. As for bending, it shouldn't be an issue, but it is possible if you try hard enough. The camera lens is glass and protrudes a little bit, but it shouldn't be that big of an issue. This phone is large, but it is smaller than phones like the Samsung Note 9. The 19.5:9 ratio is weird at first, but it fits well with the shape of the phone. The volume buttons are on the left side and the power button is on the right, but the interesting part is that on the right side, there's an alert slider. The bottom is ring, the middle is vibrate, and the top silences all sounds. I normally leave it on vibrate, but being able to switch to ring without paying too much attention to the phone does come in handy. The phone is sleek and slippery, but that isn't a bad thing. And if you do drop the phone a lot, OnePlus includes a case in the box. Most people that I showed this phone to either thought that it was an iPhone or Samsung phone, so that shows that OnePlus is doing something right. Really, I don't have any complaints with the outside hardware, so it gets an 8 out of 10. Next is the screen. The screen is a 6.41-inch notched AMOLED display at 1080p. The last part is not my favorite, but the screen looks fine. Still, really think about this. The Samsung S5 has a higher pixel density, along with the Samsung S4. With this said, the iPhone 8 Plus pixel density is lower than the OnePlus 6T. Again, real-world usage is more important than numbers, and this screen proves that having higher numbers doesn't always mean that it's better. Still, I'd like to see a OnePlus phone with a 2K or 4K display, but obviously the latter won't show up for a while. Also, the notch is there on the top, but just like the Essential phone, it's not that noticeable and actually fits pretty nicely into the frame. As for the brightness, the screen's pretty nice. There were many times where the screen was as bright as I needed it, but making it a little bit brighter might help for some situations. I didn't have many issues with the screen, and I would assume that there's some decent burn-in protection on this phone. If anything, turning on dark mode will help prevent burn-in and looks amazing as well. Oh yeah, there's an in-screen fingerprint scanner. The fingerprint scanner in the screen is an awesome feat, but it's not perfect. It works most times, but honestly, stick to facial recognition. Way faster. Also, if you use your fingerprint and have night mode won't trigger until you swipe down on the notification shade or unlock the phone. Pretty weird. Overall, I would say that the screen gets an 8 out of 10. Next is the inside hardware. The Snapdragon 845 processor is almost the best that you can get at the time of filming this video, and it seems promising. The chip is a year old and still works perfectly. Also, with 8GB of RAM, it runs better than most flagship phones out there. The 3700 mAh battery is actually pretty good and actually gives you a chance of getting almost 2 days out of this battery. The lack of dual loudspeakers is a disappointment for sure, but the bottom speaker is still pretty loud. You get some weird crackling noise when the volume is really low, but when it's maxed out, there is very minimal distortion. The headset jack is gone, but I'm personally getting closer to making everything in my life Bluetooth, so that's not a huge issue for me. Something to note is that any adapter works for this, whether it's an aftermarket cable or one with a DAC built in, so that's pretty cool. Remember that Motorola works the same way, while LG, Samsung, and Google require built-in DACs in the adapters. Memory card support is missing as usual on a OnePlus device, but there is 256GB built in, which is somewhat difficult to fill up. I wish they had a 512GB version, but also that would be very difficult to fill up as well. The phone definitely warms up, and I don't know if that's entirely a bad thing. It's mainly when using power-hungry apps, so it makes sense, but general usage gets fairly normal temperatures. The phone has some water resistance, but it's not certified. OnePlus recommends that you don't fully submerge this phone in water. I wish this phone had wireless charging, especially since the back is glass, but it's not a huge issue for me. Fast charging and a bigger battery means that I don't really need to use wireless charging as much as I did on other phones like the iPhone X. Overall, I would say that this phone gets an 8.5 out of 10 for the inside hardware. Next is the camera. The front and the back camera are amazing, don't get me wrong, but they could be better. In bright situations, the images come out looking amazing, but in dimly lit areas, the camera needs work. Okay, I'm being a little mean to this camera because it's better than most phones like the Samsung Galaxy S8, but it gives the Samsung Galaxy S9 a run for its money. But it is hard to say that the sensor is better. Really, this is a good thing because it shows what OnePlus can do in only a few years of trying. The camera app seems kind of basic and easy, which it is, but then you swipe up and everything you need is there. The funny thing about Nightscape is that I'm pretty sure that taking a dark shot is better than using this night mode, and I believe a lot of people think the same thing. It just doesn't look as good as a regular shot. There's also portrait mode, which works for the back cameras and the front camera, but I don't believe it's the best implementation out there. Sure, it's better than some, but the iPhone and Google Pixels are unmatched. Everything is pretty standard though, amazing 4K at 60 frames per second and super slow-mo at 720p 480 frames per second. Having optical image stabilization is definitely something that I enjoy, and I hope that OnePlus sticks with this from now on. The second camera is for data, so you can't take 20 megapixel shots, but the 16 megapixel sensor does just fine. Also, the zoom is amazing and easily the best camera for this even without the telephoto lens. The front camera is nice at 60 megapixels as well, but I wish they did have a focusable lens. The Pixel 3 XL really ruined me with that focusable camera. Also, lack of 4K or 60 frames per second video on the front camera is odd, considering that the Essential phone can capture 4K with the front sensor, and the Razer Phone 2 can capture 1080p at 60 frames per second. Maybe they'll add this on to the next OnePlus device. Overall, I would say that the camera is outstanding for a base price of $550, so it gets a solid 8.25 out of 10. Next is the software. The phone is fast, like really fast. The 8GB of RAM and Oxygen OS are the main reasons, really, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this is an amazing phone. There's maybe 1 or 2 glitches in this phone, but I rarely have to power off this phone, and that's over the last couple of months, so that's not too bad. However, the buttons did freeze up on this phone one time, and you probably saw that video. Annoying, but it was something a simple reboot fixed. This is OnePlus's skin over Android Pie, but even then, it's a really slight redesign when compared to Samsung or LG skins. There is a dark mode, and honestly, it's the best that I've seen on any phone, whether we're talking about official or unofficial. This phone also hides the notch a lot better than Google can, but it makes me realize that I kind of like the notch better than having a black bar on the top. There isn't an always-on display, but there is an ambient display, which shows a decent amount of stuff when moved. Once activated, the fingerprint area lights up, and within a second, you're in the phone. Double tap to wake works about 95% of the time for me, but they do also give you a single tap to wake option, which is nice, but I like the double tap better. For some reason, only Apple can nail the single tap to wake. Since the fingerprint scanner isn't on the back, fingerprint gestures aren't in this phone, but they solve this issue with more reliable launcher gestures. This launcher is highly customizable, as well as pretty much everything on this phone. This is really refreshing, especially when you're coming from a phone like a Pixel 3, which has some customizability, but not as much as a phone that acts like a stock experience, but with way more features. The face detection is very fast and easy to use. Sure, it may not be as secure, but honestly the fingerprint and facial recognition are geared more towards getting you into the phone quicker rather than security. Again, there is so much customization baked into this phone. Remember how the Pixel XL only had one way to access the apps and multitasking? This phone has 3 ways, and 2 of them are customizable. Another thing that I find nice, yet I don't use, are the screen off gestures. Pretty much you can set them to what you want, like you can make a V for the flashlight or make an O to open up the camera. Again, I don't use them, but I can see how that could help some people. Then there's Quick Launch, which uses a fingerprint scanner to launch into an app. It's all amazing stuff, and the best part is that you can activate it or leave it alone. I mean, it's your phone, and it lets you do what you want. This software never gets put into the scoring, but I will give it an amazing 9.25 out of 10. The last score is the future-proofing score. This category is hard because it's a half-cycle phone. Even then, it's another half-cycle phone. While OnePlus isn't perfect on timing, they lately have an average of 6 months before releasing a new phone. The only other company that I follow that does this is Sony, while other companies like Samsung, Apple, and LG are generally every 12 months. So OnePlus launches a phone, but how long will it last? Well, the OnePlus 3 was launched more than 2.5 years ago, and it's going to receive Android Pie at some point. Phones with similar specs like the Samsung S7 or the LG G5 max out at Android 8.0. So this is nice that OnePlus is working on an update for their older phones. Sure, it's hard to say what the support is going to look like in the future, but so far it looks pretty good for the 6T. The lack of full water resistance is concerning, but they did take steps to prevent it from getting into the phone. The phone comes with a lot of built-in memory and doesn't allow for an SD card. Honestly, I'm not really sure if that's a bad thing. The phone lacks wireless charging, which is also disappointing, along with the headset jack, but that's about all the issues that I had with this phone. The screen is amazing and has proven to be nice with screen burn. Even then, dark mode helps prevent screen burn, so you should be good. The battery easily lasts a day and should have very long life given the size. Being a USB-C 2.0 port is disappointing given the storage size, but transferring data isn't too slow. Snapdragon 855 is here in newer phones, but this phone is still super fast and shows no signs of slowing down. 8GB of RAM is perfect for this phone and will be a good amount for the next few years. Lack of stereo speakers is disappointing, but the speaker is pretty loud and clear. Overall, I would say that the phone is future-proof and gets a 7.75 out of 10. Add up the scores and the phone gets a 40.5 out of 50 or 81%. OnePlus is not perfect, but they do make really nice phones. They also make really nice phones at a cheap price. Sure, phones like the Samsung Note 9 are better than this phone, but the fact that this phone is compared to a $1,000 phone tells you something. I loved using this phone even with its downsides that it came with. I didn't really like the fact that it has a 1080p screen, lacks wireless charging, along with no headset jack, but I ended up living with it and kind of enjoying it. The screen is solid and fast charging meant I didn't really need to set this phone on the charger a lot. I wish OnePlus would give us dual loudspeakers, but hey, they need room for improvement, right? Also, this is easily the nicest looking notch out there. And that's it. Let me know what else you want me to review in the comment section below or on Twitter at MattofRWR. And I have a question for you. Do you like the bigger or smaller notches? Let me know and feel free to follow me on the social media listed above. Also, subscribe to my channel so you can see the basics video. And click the bell button so then YouTube reminds you when that video does come out. Thanks for watching.